Well, the plot thickens as the cold continues across the much of Europe at the moment, and we are going to see temperatures easing somewhat in the next few days. Thanks for clicking on to the Tuesday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. Good example of how temperatures at the surface are actually colder than the mid-levels of the atmosphere. We did see temperatures stuck under foggy conditions through the Murray, the Cromarty, and the Dornoch Firths, stuck below 0 Celsius all day long. In the sunshine, they did recover, and in the breeze, the temperatures did generally stay above the freezing mark. The fog has somewhat dissipated here in this area, and the temperatures have now started to take a tumble back down the -3s once again, after getting no better than -1.2 through the course of today. But temperatures are starting to crash under clear skies and light winds. We do have the centre of the high over the northern half of the British Isles at the moment here. So we're back down to -5 at Aviemore, -5 at Loch Lisgarnock, and also -4.6 at Altnahara. Up at Tain, only about 18 miles north of here, -2.8 Celsius, no better than -1 this afternoon. And you can see here the overall situation. We will look at the broader picture in just a second. By the way, on this day back 9 years ago, so the 9th of January 2015, I happened to see a memory on Facebook that Stornoway recorded a wind gust of 113 miles an hour, a very deep area of low pressure moving across the northern half of the country on that day, generated that 113 miles per hour gust. That ties the all-time record set back in 1962. We also seen a wind gust in excess of 110 miles an hour at Loch Lisgarnock, and that was driven by a 265 mile per hour jet stream, shaving an hour and a half off US to UK bound flights on that particular period of time. So I thought I would share that interesting little fact of weather history. So back in 9 years ago, it was rather stormy. Temperatures, I believe, on that day was 16.5 at Exeter, so a very different story then compared to what we have today. But as I've already said, it's not an overly unusually cold period at the moment here. We do have a distinct lack of snow with this outbreak, if you call it an outbreak. And the 850 temperatures are not that cold really. We've only got -3 at the Cairngorm summit and -5 at Aviemore. So this is an exact example of what I've been saying for some time about how the mid-levels of the atmosphere, sometimes you can't tend to go by that. But with that stretching out the high between the southwest and the northeast UK, that has then flipped the pattern on its head over Europe. So if we look at we'll look at the pressure and winds in just a second here, but if you look at the European continent, the temperatures are now starting to come down. Very, very cold continent indeed. Again, like I say, nothing exceptional for the time of the year by any stretch. But look at Scandinavia. We've actually jumped the temperature 51.2 Celsius at one particular site that was in the -40s 4 days ago, now up close to 9 Celsius and near a January record. But if you put the pressure chart onto this very chart here itself, this is off Meteoseal, and you can see exactly how this is evolving. Now, granted, the high has now started to slightly change shape, but we are transporting mild subtropical air around this area of high pressure, mild conditions over Iceland, driving that milder into Scandinavia. What that's done is it's then had to force that cold that was in place south, southwest, and west underneath that same very area of high pressure. So in the northern flank, exceptionally mild conditions. On the southern flank, that cold air that was in place just a few days ago has now been expanded and forced westwards underneath that area of high pressure. Isn't it amazing meteorology and weather, how it works? It really is a fascinating subject indeed. And when you've got interest in weather, you have interesting things to look at here. So the pressure is at 943 millibars at Tain, and you can see here that winds are very, very light indeed. If we look at the kilometers per hour, all day long, there has been barely a breath of wind over the far north of Scotland here. Hence why that fog that has been lingering for the last 24 to 36 hours hasn't managed to dissipate. But we are seeing it dissipating somewhat this evening, and we are going to see a temperature drop in response. But you notice here that once you get south of Aviemore, you start to see winds picking up here out of the east. So while the coldest conditions have been further north, it's felt coldest central belt southwards all the way down to the south coast of England, where winds have been in the 50, even 60 kilometres per hour range. And when you factor in a temperature a few degrees above freezing with that stiff easterly wind, you then have the lowest wind chills anywhere in the UK at the bottom end of the country here. So and look at the temperatures, look at these wind chills. It's been stuck close to -10, northern France, Belgium, Netherlands, most of the day actually. So like I say, it's not exceptional by any stretch. What may be more interesting is actually as we move towards the weekend and in the next week, looks as if that high is going to then push up towards Greenland, and the models are flexing back and forward with the overall solution, but we could see some significant snow impacts possible next week. I've said it since the beginning of last week that I'm not enthusiastic about snow during the first half of this cold spell, but it's, you know, as the period between the 10th and the 20th, we need to keep a real close eye on this. So this is the 850 temperatures. You can see the rise coming up as we go towards the latter half of this week and into the weekend. So we're below freezing at the moment over London. Then it goes up towards between +4 and +6 at 850. Now, if you look at Inverness, this is exactly what I'm talking about. We've got this inversion, coldest air right down at the surface. So the 850 is actually over Inverness, according to the GFS ensemble, is actually above average, hovering at 0 to -1 Celsius at 5,000 feet. And Cairngorm Summit is a perfect example of that, where it's -3 at 4,000 feet versus -5 at down at Aviemore level, which isn't quite. It's still relatively high up, but it's nowhere near 4,000 feet above sea level. So there has been some very interesting things going on with this situation here. I believe Helsinki has recorded the first 4 days of January was the third coldest first 4 days of January on record for Helsinki in Finland, which is rather fascinating stuff actually when you think about that. In the warmer world that we live in, it just shows you that we can still manage to get cold into the middle latitudes and into places that were back in the 50s, 60s and 70s were very familiar with -40s. It's become harder and harder to do so. Looks as if it's the first time in Paris that we've seen back-to-back ice days or temperatures that have remained below 0 Celsius since January of 2016. So again, 8 years it's taken for that to happen. But this is the temperature anomaly chart here. I thought this would be an interesting one to show you. And look at how cold it has become compared to average anyway. A full 8 to as much as 11 Celsius below average during the course of today across this central swathe from Moscow all the way to Paris. The UK firmly below average temperatures here, particularly so a bit more so across the far north. We are going to see temperatures rising, but that high centered between southwest of the UK and Ireland up towards southern Scandinavia has been, as I've already said, drawing that subtropical warmth around the west and northern flank of the high, driving warmth through Iceland and into Scandinavia here. Temperatures near record levels, like I say, but that cold air that was in place 4 days ago is now getting stretched out further south, and this is a classic example of that in a graphic form. And our friend Daniel at London and Southeast Weather highlighted that the French capital, no thaw today, no thaw yesterday at the main Paris site. It looks as if you have to go back to 2016, the last time we've seen back-to-back ice days in the French capital. which I think is quite interesting here. Overnight lows this morning down to minus 11.1 at Aviemore, minus 10.2 at Altnahara. That is the coldest of 2024 so far. Not the coldest of winter. We've seen colder conditions at the beginning of December. Look at this here, the Mont Saint Michel. I used to pass this quite often, actually, driving to Lorient with a load of fish when I worked with my previous company. I was in the northwest of France quite often, and I always looked across to the Mont Saint Michel, a beautiful spectacle, especially in the snows that they've got at the moment here on the north coast of France. Some quite significant snow actually in Cannes, another area that I was quite familiar with driving into. Look at these conditions here across the north of, across France in general, the southern UK. We had temperatures well below freezing during the course of this afternoon, or is this morning? It's actually this morning's temperatures, and wind chills were even lower. Bitterly cold wind. The dew points are very low as well. This is a very, very dry air mass actually that we're speaking about. And there you go. There's that rise. That one site in northern Sweden that dropped to minus 43, I think it was, a temperature of plus 8.3 this morning. The January record is 8.6, so only 0.3 Celsius off the January record, considering it was one of the coolest temperatures just 4 days ago. Isn't it astonishing how quickly things can change in a given weather pattern? This is Cannes, close to the north coast of France. We've seen upwards of several centimeters. I can't remember, 3.3 to 5 centimeters. It looks like had fallen in northern France. Chaos on major roads as well across the north of France in the last day or so here. And this was the scene in Paris. Isn't it just spectacular when you see snow-covered roofs in the French capital? Just spectacular scenes indeed here. And there we go. Helsinki. For the first 7 days of January, I beg your pardon, I said the first 4. Actually, the first 7 days of January ranks third coldest on record. Only 1987 and 2003 had a colder start to any year. Interestingly, these were also El Nino years, which is quite interesting actually when you think about that. So what can we expect in the next phase? Let's take a look at the GFS in today's video. So of course we've got this big situation here, big contrast over the North Atlantic. 963 millibar low just south of Greenland here. We've got that warmer advection. It's getting lifted all the way from the subtropics right up into Greenland here, around the top of the high that's now centered over the northern UK. We've been continuously seeing for the last 24-36 hours some of that cold air. A little lobe of minus 12 Celsius at 8:50 did cross over the southern UK last night into this morning here. We've had snow showers here and there as well. As we play through this loop here, watch what happens. The high kind of then lifts north and then it kind of bobs back south once again as we move into Friday. Now, as that high then shifts a little bit further south, we're drawing some of the milder air around the top and we're losing some of that cold, especially at 50, but also down at the surface. We're going to see the temperatures respond with that warming down through the column towards the surface. Now, you notice here that we're in relatively mild air actually by the time we end the working week and begin the weekend here. Notice a next surge of cold air in the eastern portions of Europe. But watch what happens as we play through the loop. During the course of Saturday, we've got a cold front that moves south over the UK here as the high then gets kicked to the west. And eventually it may start to lift up towards Greenland here. And then it looks as if, as we move towards the middle and second half of next week, it's all eyes on low pressure system moving in from the south, meeting that Arctic air coming in from the north. If we look at the overview chart, you can see here that we have got a clash in between. And this could be potentially a significant snowmaker here as we move into the middle and second half of next week. You notice here that area of low pressure then moves in. It becomes quite messy. You notice here low pressure coming back into play once again. So we'll wait and see what happens once we get into the middle of next week time frame here. So we have a greater chance of seeing snow potential next week as low pressure becomes involved. We'll look at the details in the coming days at that, because it's still quite far away. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you again tomorrow with more. Bye for now.